they say rivers remember. That long after blood dries and names are forgotten, the waters carry stories. If the Benue River could speak, it would whisper of ambushes in the night, fields soaked in sorrow, and ancestral grudges carved deep into the clay of Nigeria's central heartland. It would speak of the Tiv and the Jukun, two peoples locked in a struggle so persistent, so quietly devastating, that few outside their world have ever truly understood its roots. This is not just a story of conflict. It is a story of identity, of memory, and of how history, when ignored or twisted, can bleed into the present like an old wound reopened. To understand the Tiv-Jukun conflicts is to travel back in time, not decades, but centuries. The Jukun people trace their lineage to the mighty Kwararafa Confederacy, a loose but powerful kingdom that dominated the middle belt of what is now Nigeria from as early as the 14th century. Oral traditions and early colonial records, including those from British anthropologists like C.K. Meek in his seminal 1931 work, Tribal Studies in Northern Nigeria, describe the Jukun as priest kings, guardians of sacred shrines, and iron workers of great renown. Their capital, Wukari, became the spiritual heart of this empire, and to this day, the Aku-Uka of Wukari is revered as a symbol of ancestral authority. The Tiv, by contrast, are often described as a people on the move. Their oral histories, some of which are preserved in the Tiv oral traditions compiled by the Nigerian scholar Akiga, speak of a migration from the east, possibly Cameroon, into the Benue Valley around the 16th or 17th century. The Tiv did not arrive with kings or centralized hierarchies. Instead, they brought a decentralized system of clan elders, based on kinship and consensus. In Tivland, no one ruled by divine right. Leadership was earned, not inherited. And therein lies the first fracture. When the Tiv began settling in the fertile lands near the Jukun, tensions simmered almost immediately. The Jukun viewed them as intruders. The Tiv saw themselves as farmers seeking space to thrive. Their worldviews, one rooted in hierarchy and ritual authority, the other in egalitarianism, could not have been more different. Still, for a time, they coexisted, though uneasily. Trade continued. Intermarriage occurred. But suspicion lingered. Everything changed with the arrival of the British. In 1901, as the Royal Niger Company was being transformed into the Northern Protectorate of Nigeria, the British began reshaping the political map to serve colonial interests. Wukari, with its centralized structure and literate elites, was ideal for indirect rule. The Tiv were not. British officers, including the controversial resident Captain Rupert East, often expressed frustration at the Tiv's statelessness. So they empowered the Jukun over the Tiv, granting Wukari jurisdiction over Tiv villages and appointing Jukun chiefs to administer Tiv areas. It was a political shortcut and a powder keg. For decades, Tiv farmers were taxed by Jukun chiefs they had not chosen, fined in courts they did not trust, and forced into labor for rulers they did not recognize. Resistance was inevitable. Between 1923 and 1939, the Tiv launched several uprisings, many of them brutally suppressed by colonial forces with Jukun collaboration. One British report from 1935, stored in the National Archives in Kaduna, notes how a group of Tiv elders was flogged publicly for refusing to recognize a Jukun-appointed chief. The seeds of bitterness were being watered. By independence in 1960, both groups had entrenched narratives. To the Jukun, the Tiv were unruly squatters, eroding their ancestral lands. To the Tiv, the Jukun were colonial puppets, clinging to outdated feudal privileges. The end of British rule did not mean peace, it meant a vacuum. And into that vacuum poured decades of frustration, weaponized by politics. The 1990s would mark one of the most violent chapters in this saga. In 1990, in what has come to be known in Wukari as the Burning Days, a dispute over a local government boundary escalated into full-scale ethnic violence. Homes were torched, crops destroyed, dozens killed, thousands displaced. Eyewitnesses, interviewed years later by Human Rights Watch and Nigerian newspapers like The Guardian, spoke of militias roaming in pickup trucks, of children hiding in dry riverbeds, of old women begging for their lives in a language their attackers refused to hear. The violence flared again in 2001. again in 2010, and again in 2019. With each eruption, the reasons became harder to untangle: land disputes, political appointments, election rigging, revenge killings. But always, underneath it all, lay the echo of an old wound. Who belongs? Who rules? Who remembers? And yet, the most haunting aspect of this history is not just its brutality. It is its silence. Outside of Nigeria, the Tiv-Jukun conflicts are rarely mentioned in textbooks. No major international documentary has ever covered it in depth. And within Nigeria, mainstream discourse often reduces it to ethnic clashes, ignoring the deep historical trauma that drives it. But there are those who remember. In the dusty halls of Benue State University, historians like Dr. Irewees Hager, himself Tiv, have written extensively on the need for cultural understanding and historical reconciliation. In Taraba State, Jukun elders like Alhaji Suleiman Abubakar, interviewed by the BBC Hausa service in 2020, have called for truth-telling commissions and intermarriage as a path forward. And in marketplaces and churches and beer parlors along the Benue Plains, ordinary Tiv and Jukun people, weary of burying their sons, have begun whispering the same question: must our children inherit this fight? Perhaps the most chilling revelation of all is that the boundaries fueling this conflict are not ancient. They were drawn with pencils in British offices a century ago. The lines between Wukari and Katsinaala, between Jukun chiefdoms and Tiv clan lands, were never meant to endure. But paper maps become sacred when soaked in blood. And so we return to the river. The Benue flows on, wide and indifferent, past scorched fields and quiet villages. It does not take sides. It remembers. In the end, the Tiv-Jukun conflict is not just a story of Nigeria. It is a mirror held up to every nation where history is forgotten, where colonial shortcuts become permanent scars, where identity is politicized and memory ignored. It asks us, what happens when people are denied the right to narrate their own past? And perhaps, more hauntingly, how many other forgotten wars are still quietly burning, waiting for someone to listen? If you found yourself drawn into this untold chapter of African history, if it left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. The truth, as always, is layered, and the past, no matter how buried, finds a way to speak. So stay curious, because next time, we'll explore another hidden struggle, the kingdom of Kwararafa itself, and the mystery of how it rose and why it vanished. If you found this story compelling, help keep history alive. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Have you ever heard of the Tiv-Jukun conflict before today? What part surprised you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's uncover the forgotten together. This is History Off the Map. Until next time.